Hi, I'm Marion, Landry, Technical Marketing Manager for 3dsMaxDesign and Showcase. In this video, we'll review what is Ambient Occlusion to continue on with our series of tips and tricks on mental ray rendering. Ambient occlusion is a method introduced by the film industry for emulating the look of true global illumination using a shader that calculates the extent to which an area is occluded or prevented from receiving incoming light. For example, if you look at these balloons, this is a real image. You see some of this ambient occlusion happening in real life when some of the balloons are close from each other, stopping the light from entering where these balloons are close from each other. You see it in these two balloons, and you see it in these balloons as well that are all close from each other. Now in 3dsMaxDesign, we have a shader that's called the Mental Ray Ambient Reflective Occlusion Shader, and it creates a grayscale output that is dark in area that light cannot reach and bright in area that light can. So for example, when these two balls are close from each other, it creates this area of darkness. Same idea, where this ball gets close to the floor, you can see some of the darkness happening here. And the process is that it's basically that this ball that is close from the floor is stopping the light from entering and therefore creating this ambient shadow. Here is a good example of the Mental Ray Ambient Reflective Occlusion Shader, where it can really help add realism to your image. If I base my idea on a real photo, you could see that in this photo, when the two walls are getting close to each other, it creates this ambient shadow. Same idea to where this fireplace is getting close to the wall. You see that it's preventing the light from entering and creating this ambient shadow. Now, by using the Mental Ray Ambient Reflecting Occlusion Shader and rendering a separate pass where I only have the ambient shadow, I can clearly see where it would help in my rendering, where the wall meets the floor, on the stairs, or on these frames that are getting close to the wall. Now you can see that compositing this image on top of my regular render will add some realism. I'll show you an example later where the two are composed together. Another area where ambient occlusion can truly help your rendering is when you are rendering fabric. You can see in the real image, in the fold of this fabric, there's a lot of ambient occlusion happening. There's a lot of light that is being stopped from entering certain parts of the fabric. Now, to help identify the fold of these fabric in my rendering, it would really help to add the ambient occlusion and really add some realism. Keep in mind that you can either render a specific rendering pass using an ambient occlusion shader, or you can add the ambient occlusion on the material level, which might be easier sometimes. The only two materials that do have ambient occlusion are either the architecture and design material or the Autodesk material. If you look at the properties of each of these materials, you'll find for the architecture and design material a tab that's called Special Effect, where you'll be able to turn on the ambient occlusion. Same idea is happening on the Autodesk materials, where you have under the material properties a tab that's called, now here I have a render without ambient occlusion. The render is nice quality and I can clearly identify the object, but sometimes somehow it does not have a realistic look. Now if I show you the result with the ambient shadow, you see clearly that the object now belongs. You can clearly identify the fold. You can see that these objects are sitting on the floor, and some of these elements on the weight are clearly identified. Like for example, these numbers that I could barely see before are now easy to read. So let's have a look at the one before. So this is without ambient occlusion, nice quality, but somehow it's missing a little something to make it more realistic. With ambient occlusion, certainly everything starts to belong to the rendering. The elements are sitting properly on the floor, the folder clearly identified, and somehow I can read this image a lot more clearly. Now, of course, for this example, I made the ambient occlusion layer quite dark, so I can tone down this effect if I want, because I could see that it's starting to be maybe a little bit too dirty for this example. But somehow you get the idea of why you would want to add ambient occlusion to your rendering.